Uniting for Kids, Edvice, with Angela Engel, helping you navigate today's complex education system so you as parents can make the best decisions for your child. When your child grows into a happy, healthy, and contributing adult, they can make better decisions for our future.
We're all in this together.
Hi, I'm Angela Engel. Thank you for joining us with Edvice. If it's your first time, please hit the subscribe button to my channel and the notification button so you can receive updated content. Today, we're talking about education equity, and I'd like to give just a little bit of a time perspective. In the past 8 weeks, we've seen the brutal murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. Across the world, we are seeing protests and uprisings demanding for equity and justice. There's 3 things that are happening as a result of this outcry, this public outcry. One is that we're seeing the light shine on current violence and injustice, but we're also seeing communities be unified in this common cause. And it is causing us to create a collective will to re-examine the inequities codified in today's systems and institutions in the United States. My name is Angela Engel. I'm the author of the book Seeds of Tomorrow and the founder of the nonprofit organization Uniting for Kids. I'm here to explain where the injustices and inequities live in schools and classrooms. And I first want to just go back to the original purpose of American public education. And it's evolved over time, but always we have held to the 2 commitments to public education. One is the promise of democracy. And the idea that if we're to be a citizenry that elects our own representative government, that we as the deciding citizenry need to be educated. But the second purpose of education has been to serve as the great equalizer, ensuring opportunity for all. NCLB, that was first passed in 2002, has been the most devastating federal education policy in the history of the United States. And as a result of No Child Left Behind, across the country, we've seen schools closed in poor and low-income communities with predominantly people of color. We've seen the firing of teachers, and more children now live in poverty than before No Child Left Behind. And I think it's really important that we understand the justification for NCLB and how we got here. Initially, those advocates pointed to the achievement gap. And rather than look at causality, which would have pointed directly to poverty and the opportunity gap, instead, what proponents of corporate education reform did was to blame teachers for those education gaps. When you have policies that are built on a flawed assumption, what you get are flawed outcomes. Teachers have always had accountability. They've had more accountability than any other profession. They don't need things like body cams because they have classrooms with 35 students and their 70 parents and administrators and an elected school board that is voted in by that community, designed to ensure the success of those neighborhood schools. But there has been another initiative behind resolving the achievement gap, and it's been the hidden agenda. The hidden agenda behind test-based accountability includes profit interests and the business community. What I think it's important to understand is that the drafters of NCLB were not community leaders. They were not parents of children in the education system. They were textbook publishers. And seeing the decline of textbook sales with the information age and computer technology, they were looking for their next monopoly and a way to ensure their market profits. And where they looked was to high-stakes testing. And with No Child Left Behind, it created an automatic monopoly requiring every child in grades 3 through 10 to be tested every single year. Now, it was the business community and the business roundtable who set their sights not on improving education, not on closing that achievement gap for people of color or children of low income. Their goal was the $620 billion that we spend in American public education. Now, just for comparison, and I think this is an important comparison, the United States also spends about $989 billion on the military and Department of Defense. But what's important to understand is that these profit interests didn't care about children. They didn't follow education best practices or evidence-based research that correlated to what we know about how children learn and grow. These interests were specifically intended to grow their profits. Now, some people might say, how do you know that test-based accountability is racially motivated and leads to inequities and injustice? And I want to explain that very clearly. Standardized tests today, such as the PARCC and state-mandated tests, are racially biased. In every single study, they have been correlated to income. That means it's not a matter of ability and it's not a matter of achievement. It's a matter of access to resources. We have a system that rewards communities that are predominantly white and of wealth, and we have an accountability system that punishes people of color and communities of low income. It's really a game of insecurity. And we see a ratings game that some people for a short time can afford to play and win. But in the long term, it increases the divide between the haves and the have-nots. And in the United States today, we are as segregated as we were during the civil rights movement. The reason is that you have wealthy communities that are labeled as high achieving, and you have poor communities that are labeled as failing. And I think it's really important that we talk about the psychological impact of labeling and rating schools. Because what we have today isn't any different than the whites-only fountains that we had before civil rights. Now today what we see are children entering school buildings, updated, high-tech, that bear the blue ribbon of achievement. And when our low communities that are dilapidated, that don't have enough computers or desks for the children, that psychological impact of where a child learns has long-lasting implications. I recently was driving through Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where they have been plagued by a voucher system that has left their schools obliterated. And on one of the buildings was the banner, "We are data-driven school." We are a data-driven school. I thought about that and I thought, a school driven by data. And I can't imagine what parent would want to send their child to a school that was driven by data. I think if you asked any parents, what they'd really like is to attend a school that was driven by students and focused on students. But in this age of high stakes accountability, we've gotten further and further away from what's in the best interest of our children. Test-based accountability today really isn't any different than the eugenics movement of the 1920s. And the eugenics movement was used as an IQ test designed to sort and track students and create opportunities for those that scored well and deny opportunities for those that didn't. This test-based accountability, predominantly driven by the business community for profit motives, isn't a matter of unintended consequences. The consequences were intended. And now, 20 years after the passage of No Left Behind, those intended consequences are very clear. We have schools that have been closed. No school closed in suburban white community. All those schools that have been closed in predominantly Black communities and communities where they have low-income children. We have seen the firing of teachers as a result of performance pay and tying teacher pay to test scores, which came out of race to the top. Now that we've seen teachers systematically eliminated from their positions. We have children, again, primarily children of color, that have been unfairly retained. Some have been denied their diplomas. They are denied access to higher classes like AP classes. The consequences for children have been severe. Again, we are more segregated, and kids today that are going to college are less prepared than they were before No Child Left Behind. So I recently sat down with one of the proponents here in Colorado of the corporate education reform movement. He is not only behind vouchers, which was overturned in the Supreme Court of Colorado, but he was also part of a nonprofit organization that provided funds to parents who were attending charter schools and helped with funding like for transportation or for uniforms. And when I asked Steve about his intention, he said, I believe that every child deserves a quality education. And he said, we knew schools were failing. We just needed a measurement tool to prove it. I said, Steve, I'm in education. I've administered those tests. I know those tests are crap. I know those tests don't get to improved educational experiences for children or closing the achievement gap. And I said, but you're a developer. So if your goal was really equity in education, instead of providing vouchers or funds for those parents to drive their children outside of their communities, why not just build affordable housing within those nicer communities? Those communities with parks and libraries and museums and public safety. Why, instead of having to leave their community, why not either invest in their community or create opportunities in the wealthier communities? Now we know the intention was never about children, and it was never about equity. It was about dismantling the greatest equalizer in the United States, which in the past has been public education. Now, we've never really lived up to the promise of public education, have we? But here in this time of protest and in the time where we're taking a closer look at where the inequities and injustices live, I'm asking that we first start with our public education system. I ask you to also reach out to your legislators and ask them to undo the wrong that has been done with test-based accountability. Don't use biased measurement indicators that continue to further the divide between the haves and the have-nots. Let's return to a public education system that was intended as a ladder, not a barrier, for all children. In 2004, I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to connect with Don Pearl. He was a teacher at the time in Greeley, Colorado, working with a predominantly migrant population of middle school students. And he recognized the devastating consequences of evaluating students and schools based on these high-stakes standardized tests. And Don and I together helped launch a national boycott of high-stakes testing, such as PARCC and those that are state mandated. And there's an important story that I want to tell. I have two daughters, and I also was an educator. And in Colorado here, I administered the first high-stakes test accountability measure. At the time, it was called CSAP. And very quickly, when I administered that test, I knew that it really reflected the lowest levels of learning. And to put that much emphasis on that kind of measure would lower the expectations for every single child in every classroom across the country. And so since 1998, I've been active and involved in this cause. And I was so honored to join with Don Pearl in encouraging parents throughout the country to opt out of high-stakes testing. So when I had my two daughters, one was in 3rd grade and one was in 5th grade, and I sent in my opt-out letter, I'll never forget the school principal coming to me. And he said, Angela, we need your daughter's test scores because those are smart girls, and we want to make sure that we get the very best ratings in our school that we deserve. And I said, listen, we know good and well that these measures don't attest to achievement. They don't attest to a school or a teacher's ability. What they measure is socioeconomic income. And I'm not about to have my children used to make you look good or to make a child somewhere else look bad. We're not playing this game of insecurity. And since then, the opt-out movement has grown nationally. So I encourage parents, all of you, to say no to high-stakes standardized tests. And right now, at this important opportunity in our time, I'm encouraging you to go to our website, www.unitingforkids.com, and share the sample letter. Send it to your school board members, send it to your superintendent, and send it to your legislators. And let them know that education equity should be the #1 priority in public education today. Not so that some children look good, but that all children learn well. That's the goal of public education. It is designed as the great equalizer, and it is our guarantee of democracy. Thank you so much for joining me here at Edvice. Again, please hit the subscribe button so that I can reach out to you on the next edition of Edvice, and I look forward to connecting with you soon. Thank you.
We're all in this together through the thick and thin.